Welcome to the next episode of The Hidden Switch. Today our guest is Emily Chang. She is the Chief Commercial Officer of Chagee, the Chinese premium tea brand listed on the US Stock Exchange since April 2025. And now the company operates over 7,000 tea houses across 8 countries. Emily brings us 26 years of experience at iconic brands from P&G to Apple, Starbucks China, and more. She is also a best-selling author and has delivered 4 TEDx talks. She splits her time between Los Angeles and Shanghai. Emily, pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks, Ashley. Glad to be here.
First of all, we are going to cover a ton of things about the third culture. We're going to talk about Chinese brands going global. We're going to talk about consumers. But let's start with your own story. You've spent your career being the person in the room who understands both sides. You know, the third culture executive. But being a bridge is quite exhausting. You get walked on from both ends sometimes. So what's the most frustrating misconception you think that American executives have about China and vice versa today in 26?
That's a great first question. In fact, that was very lovely of you to say, I understand both sides, because I think this is a truth in life. The more you see, the less you truly understand. So I would argue I don't really understand either side well enough. But what I have learned is that a lack of understanding can lead to assumptions. And assumptions then become stories that may or may not be grounded in truth or reality. And those stories are what cause divisiveness. The biggest lesson I have learned is to ask a question. A question like, is that true? Often lands softer than, well, I heard that. So questions like, is it true that China copies US tech? Is it true that US discriminate against Chinese? Those questions may land more as curious and open-minded than, I heard that. That's probably my biggest observation. And the framing of the question can diffuse the emotions in the room and lead to productive dialogue.
Absolutely. And today, the quality of questions in general, I think, in life determines the answer, right? The better questions we ask, the better answers we're ultimately getting. And today, it just seems, maybe because of the speed of the world, maybe because of, again, social media, the news cycles, the fact that we online are the products and it's all about eyeballs, but we stopped asking high quality questions as often as probably we should. Now let's talk about the tea and coffee. You ran marketing for Starbucks in China and right now you're building Chagee in America. So both are selling this beautiful daily ritual in a cup. But tea and coffee carry completely different cultural weight. So what does a cup of tea mean to a Chinese consumer that a cup of coffee simply cannot mean for an American one? And can that meaning be exported? What's your take on that?
I think they are very different beverages. Well, one is a couple hundred years old, one is thousands of years old. Coffee is fast, tea is generally slow. Coffee is a morning jolt of efficiency, whereas tea is enjoyed slowly throughout the day. In fact, even think about how the products are prepared. Coffee beans are roasted under intense heat until they pop. Tea leaves slowly dry under the gentle warmth of the sun and air. So in fact, they're very different products and they are consumed at very different occasions and even in different day parts. Tea definitely has a cultural context in China that it may not yet have in the US. But what that means to me is that there's actually a ton of white space to introduce it to American consumers in a really meaningful way. And I think for me, one of the reasons I was interested to take on this role is that Chagee is not only introducing a beverage, we're introducing the benefits of that beverage, exactly to your question. And in the US, as I've come back after living in China for over a decade, I truly believe this is the perfect time to share that daily tea ritual in the United States. We are absolutely seeing a trend of consumers wanting to move more towards spending their time intentionally, moving away from drinking too much coffee all day, drinking too much alcohol at night. And that is the perfect place where tea can come in.
And it's quite interesting because recently there's been a huge popularity boom in China when it comes to coffee. I mean, Shanghai, by the number of coffee shops, is, I believe, number 1 in the world, right?
And Fugu. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. And when it comes to tea, like in my office, and then we have offices in Hong Kong, Shenzhen, Shanghai, I am the only person who drinks tea. So
Okay.
the young consumers, I would say, in China kind of moved on, and the tea seems a little bit more old school, or a bit less exciting. And if it is tea, it's less traditional green tea, but more of a mixture of various flavors, either lychee plus lemon plus, I do not know, berries. When in the West right now we have overall this big China maxing trend, right? People are drinking hot water, exploring tea, Tai Chi, and whatever. Why is that? Are young people just looking for something different, or is it, are we going to close the loop and they are going to find that heritage and connection with tea again?
That's a great question. I think what this speaks to fundamentally is the globalization of the consumer. You know, I was talking with my daughter who's about to go to college, and I was saying, what you are experiencing today is so different than what I experienced as a teenager in the 80s. We didn't have social media. So right now, a young person in Shanghai sitting on Anfulu can experience the exact same trend that an American can be experiencing sitting in southern Los Angeles. And what that means to me is there is a joint curiosity. And it goes back to the first question of, are we asking great questions? Are we curious about the world around us? So perhaps young Chinese are interested in coffee because they see the predominance of it in the Western world. They want to understand it, and they're interested to explore things they didn't grow up with. Meanwhile, Americans are realizing perhaps they drink too much coffee, perhaps too much alcohol, and they're looking for different experiences. And to your point, looking at this becoming Chinese trend is a great example of that. Perhaps it started with Red Note refugees, and it has continued to evolve into a curiosity. Now, I know there are some comments around cultural misappropriation, and perhaps there is some of it. But at a deeper level, I would like to believe that this comes from a place of curiosity and a desire to understand another's culture.
I also believe so. And over the past 1.5 years, we've had so many news that really delivered that new China story to the young people. We had the DeepSeek moment, we had the iShow Speed. Right now we have all these celebrities and Formula One sports people in, again, China, be it Shanghai or Chengdu. So they come to visit, they come to explore, see for themselves. And visa, at least to some European countries, is no longer an obstacle. So people come to see, come to experience, come to talk to other, people to people, heart to heart. And that breaks some of those, as you said, barriers, and maybe some misconceptions as well are being shattered. But when it comes also to going back to your own story, I think it is very, very interesting because you have authored a book which is called The Spare Room. And it's about you building that social legacy, the impact you leave on people around you. Can you talk about that book and that philosophy that has been guiding you throughout your career?
Thank you for asking that. Yes, I started to write this book, The Spare Room, all about telling these stories of now 18 kids, young people, babies, vulnerable people who have needed a safe place to live. And we had the privilege, with my job moving us all over the world, of caring for these kids. And then when I was doing my first TEDx talk, what they challenged me on was, think deeper. Is your story really about the spare room? Are you encouraging people to open their room? And I realized that's not the deep idea. The idea we're sharing is everybody has a social legacy. The construct of that is, imagine a simple Venn diagram. For those of us who grew up as engineers, everything is either an XY axis or a Venn diagram, isn't it? And so on one circle, you've got the offer. This is your unique combination of personality, experiences, success traits. And then on the other hand, the other circle is your offense. And that would be the thing you see in the world that speaks to you more than anything else, that stops you in your tracks and you say, that is not okay. I've got to do something about it. If you're able to articulate your offer and your offense, put those two circles together, and that intersection in between is what I call your social legacy. So legacy is your ability to leave something better than you found it, and social defines the space in which you want to have that impact. And I think it's exactly the same whether it's at home, in your spare room, or it's at work, in the impact that you want to have. Because we are at our best at work when we're clear about our offer and we know what we bring to the table. We know what our experiences are, we're confident in our skills, And when we aim that set of our offer at a suitable opportunity, I think we unleash our best. And that's where we thrive. And when we thrive, we do our best work, and it just becomes this beautiful upward cycle.
And ultimately, this is what life is about. I mean, life is about growth, right? Anything.
Exactly.
It's either growing or dying. And as a person, how do we grow? We grow through challenges. We grow through bringing something to the world, impacting someone. And I think it's beautiful if you have so much clarity. If every executive out there had so much clarity on what do they bring to the table and how they actually impact something broader, bigger, they're not just there to make money. They're not just there to take care of their small circle. And they could take people along with them on this journey. That would be so much beautiful. So for those of our listeners who have not yet checked the book called The Spare Room, please do check it out. It's about, again, vulnerable young people that Emily and her family have mentored throughout the years and how that changed her perception on life and leadership. Let's then switch back again and talk about the Chagee. So many Chinese companies are going global today, and Chagee is one of those. But the journey is not always easy and straightforward, and Chagee stock, for example, has dropped significantly on NASDAQ after its IPO. There's been a brutal price war also in China on the ground, where competitors are practically giving away milk tea, let's say. And you are in LA opening tea houses and partnering with creators and, you know, as you said just now before the interview, visiting competitors and trying to understand what makes local consumers click. So how are you figuring out this China going global story for your brand and for broader, let's say, Chinese brands that are exploring international markets?
Well, let me pause and connect these two questions because they seem disconnected, but they actually have a red thread, which is my boss who recruited me, Jay, in Chinese, his name is Junjie, has an incredible social legacy of his own. You know, when I first connected with him, I had just very publicly, by the way, declared that I was going to retire from paid work to focus on my next book, to focus on spending time with my daughter who was graduating. And when I met him, he asked me, why would you want to do that now? You seem to have a lot of energy. And I said, yes, the social legacy idea really speaks to me, and I want to leave as much positive impact as I can in this world. If I dedicate full time to that, perhaps I can do exactly that. And he said, do you know my background? And I said, with respect, no offense, but I don't, because I am not interviewing, because I'm not interested in a job. And he told me his story about how he was orphaned at 10, how he was living on the streets until he was 17. We ended up, both of us, with tears in our eyes. I said, I cannot believe what you have overcome. And he said, I cannot imagine what my life would have been if I had met an auntie, an IE like you when I was young. And I was so touched. And he said, this is what I want to do. You know, as we have tears in our eyes, he said, Emily, I want to build a 100-year brand in 100 countries. I want to create something that lasts. And he had such conviction. My goosebumps all rose. And I thought, you know what? I will do this. I will do this for him. This job, because I took a step down from a CEO role into a CCO role. I am here purely for social legacy. I want to support this incredible man in his vision. In fact, he's the third founder I've worked for, but working directly with, and he's 32 years old and so passionate in the beginning of his journey. So if I go back to what you were asking about in terms of the opportunity he sees, I guess I don't want to put words in his mouth, but here's how I sort of see the global opportunity for Chagee. We're quite saturated in China with over 7,000 tea houses. Asia Pacific continues to grow. Many different countries are opening. And then in North America, I think everybody understands you've got to establish in North America as a global brand. If you want to be seen as a global brand. Now, there are, to your point, a lot of Chuhai brands, so these brands that are going abroad out of China. I think here's what I would say about our positioning, and I have the deep privilege of defining that global brand positioning. We are proudly from Yunnan, where tea was born, and yet we are not a Chinese brand. We are a global brand. And I think that differentiation is what motivates me and drives me, because my boss's vision is to create a 100-year brand in 100 countries. That means our job is to land this brand here, proudly from Yunnan, and yet created for the world.
And this is so beautiful. And for a lot of people, outside of, let's say, your industry and maybe China also space, when they see a brand from China, for them it's a Chinese brand. And
Yes.
as much as we want to say it is a brand from Yunnan, the birthplace of tea,
Yes.
it is a brand that, I do not know, let's say, produces cosmetics with XYZ angle, or it is a brand of functioning sportswear. They look at it and they still say, Anta, Chinese brand. Chagee, Chinese brand. How do you overcome it? Or do you even want to overcome that perception?
Well, I think there is a line to sort of walk in terms of who we are. If you don't say you are proudly from Yunnan, you have no roots, right? We were talking earlier today about the idea of having roots and wings. We need both as humans to thrive. We were talking about raising our children, but isn't it the same for a brand? You have to have roots. You have to have an origin story, where you come from, and it has to resonate with authenticity. People smell a fake a mile away. So of course we are proudly from Yunnan, where Jay is from, where he started only in 2017. That has to be true. And yet, if we want to grow those wings and spread out and become a brand that can resonate globally, then we have to find the way to tell our story in a way. So for instance, Jay created these incredible cutting edge technology, these machines. So they're AI fueled, and what they do is enable a very perfect T-espresso shot. So we pull T-espresso shots the way that you would pull an espresso shot. Then that pure tea shot is added to either milk or to filtered water for a tea latte or for a pure tea. That is a very different experience. If I use Chinese language to describe it, or if I use even like 大红袍 to describe my tea, that would be difficult to translate. But instead, if I talk about T-espresso, if I talk about extracted teas and redefine my menu to be extracted versus brewed teas, and then I talk about a roasted black tea latte, I'm still bringing the essence of my brand and what works because we are a global brand, but I'm creating the narrative and the storytelling in North America in a way that lands the way a global brand does.
That makes a lot of sense. And talking about consumers and how some of these experiences land, Howard Schultz famously built Starbucks around this third space and the space between basically home and work. And Chagee is making the same bet with its modern tea houses.
Yeah.
But the pandemic fundamentally changed the way people interact with physical spaces, including the third spaces. So how do you still build that? How do you envision that in America and around the world? What is the third space? Does it still exist? And what does it need to be?
Great question. I would say it doesn't still exist. It is newly re-existing in the sense that Howard Schultz had experienced something in Italy he thought was so beautiful in the mornings, the way everybody came into the espresso shop and stood around and chit-chatted with their neighbors, and it created a sense of community. The sense of community is what works. What's different for a modern tea house is that the day part perhaps is different. I'll tell you, we just opened our 8th modern tea house in Ontario. And one thing that we have seen very consistently is this interest. We see literally hundreds of people in line for our tea houses. And they are not just the people who have come across our tea houses in Asia and love it. They're people from the neighborhood. You know, prior to Ontario, we opened in Long Beach on 2nd Street, and we're on an end cap. And so really, we're facing these homes. And people were just coming out of their homes. One lady came out in her robe and slippers and walked across the street and said, "What is this? This has been empty for a bit of time. And I've seen the construction. I'm so excited to learn." Another person came over, and her husband, Devin, was so curious. He sat down with me. He said, "I know you're probably," because I like to work the line myself and talk to guests and learn about the stories. He said, "Can I just ask you some questions? What is a tea house?" And to your earlier question, he was so curious about tea. He said, "Can you tell me what tea is and what's different about the tea here?" And by the end of it, he said, "You know what? I work from home 2 days a week. This is going to be my new spot." And I think those are the ways that people are getting to know us. And it's not just a workspace. I would say, if I were to define it, we are becoming a third place for the third wave of tea. What I mean by that is a significant proportion of our revenue comes in the afternoon. I think that makes a lot of sense. You're coming in with lunch, you're picking a better tea than what you might get in your restaurant. And then, you know, between lunch and dinner, People need an afternoon refreshment. We are a much healthier option than a soda that you might pop or than a sugar-laden kind of refresher beverage. And here is the thing, Ashley, that I think maybe we underestimated. We set it as a strategy, and we're thrilled to see that it's starting to pay off, which is our second day part is really the evening. It's been popping. And I had said to you earlier, we had just come from some competitive shops. We came from our own, which is right across the street from my house at Century City. One of the things we've been talking about is curating an evening tea service. Now, we did this when we went to New York and kind of created our first ever to kind of pilot what that would look like. The evening tea service reaches out to those people who are looking for a place to connect. And Chagee is, in fact, becoming a gathering place. And do you know what? This is what goes back to Jay's vision, and it gives me such joy. He truly believes, he says in Chinese all the time, 以茶会友. He believes that tea brings people and communities together.
Yes, absolutely. And I can attest to that. I'm based in Hong Kong, and there is a Chagee just across the road also from my office. It just opened a few months ago on Li Tung Avenue. And for the first maybe 1 or 2 weeks, let's say, people were just grabbing a takeaway, and that was quite normal. And then we all discovered that there is a huge second floor. And when I ventured up to that huge, and I'm talking about enormous. I mean, for Hong Kong, space is precious. So when you go up, it's literally a huge room with a few different, let's say sections. And I saw kids. Middle school children sitting there in their uniforms doing their homework. And I saw people, talking business. And I saw young adults just hanging out. And I saw some foreigners. And people were just sitting there, with one cup of tea and hanging out. It was very, very unusual because, again, in Hong Kong, space is precious and people typically go home or stay in school, and Chagee just provided that opportunity for people to come together. This is happening, and community is indeed very, very much involved. Talking about becoming a global brand, right? Not a Chinese brand, and building that new third iteration of what tea is globally, and that newly found understanding of that drink, and on top of it, building community and legacy. It's a lot of work. And of course, for decades, when it comes to global marketing domination, or let's say brands domination, it was primarily Western brands coming to, and expanding overseas and coming to places like China with their manual, and they would ultimately have a lot of soft power and a lot of, I think, Western ideas brought into those markets. But right now, the Chinese brands are trying to crack the Western market. And most of them are finding it unusual, challenging, maybe sometimes failing, sometimes succeeding. In your experience so far, what has been the single most important rule from maybe the old Western playbook that is still applicable today, or that the Chinese brands must throw out completely or follow? And how ultimately can they be a bit more successful in this journey?
Well, my initial reaction goes to what can we learn from the West and the East? And actually, I sort of corrected myself even as I was listening to your question, because I would say the number one rule for any business, regardless of where you're based, regardless of your industry or who you're trying to reach out to and engage, is meeting the customer where they're at. I mean, for us, what that means is we have to invite our consumers to learn about our tea and its benefits. They are our guests, and they are our potential guests. And this also speaks to your earlier question about the opportunity for tea in America. It's huge, as long as we remember. This is an age-old thing that everybody has to remind themselves of when they are in the business of marketing. We are not the consumer. We understand so much more than they do, no matter what, because that is our job. As long as we remember, tea is still new to a lot of American consumers. The tea that we are offering in particular. And then we invest our time, we invest our resources, and we meet them where they're at and bring them along the journey. We have to think about what tea is. Now, there is a lot of tea sold in North America. Don't get me wrong. There's RTD, a bottle of pure tea or Lipton's tea. There is tea bags that's brewed at home, right? That's plop, just add water. And there might be an iced tea that you order at a restaurant along with your lunch. In the South, there is sweet tea. There are lots of different types of tea, but understanding the occasion and who's drinking that particular type of tea can help inform the way that we speak to them about our tea so that they can understand what it is that we offer, what it is that might be familiar, that they're very drawn to, and what it is that's different and unique that they might be curious about.
So it's still ultimately all about education, knowing your customer, meeting your customer where they're at, and educating.
That's right. Absolutely.
And as Chagee is developing various markets, as you said, Southeast Asia is an important one, the United States is an important one. Do you see very different ways to educate the consumers or where they're at?
I just went off camera. Hold on. You know what? I have one here. Yes, this is great. I saw we are still a startup here, so we embrace working as a startup, which I know you can appreciate. So since my home, I mentioned, is opposite Century City. If I showed you, actually, I will. I'll show you the rest of my house. I've turned it into a WeWork once a week. So my team meets here. This is my living room, and I literally put a table here so that this is one conference room. The dining room's another conference room. There's a third room, and then we've got a courtyard and a backyard. So we do meet here, and that's why I happen to have this right here. This is something one of my team, my head of retail, concepted. And this is a really interesting idea. She said to me one day, you know how you stamp your passport and people who are curious want to go see the world and they get their passport stamps and it becomes a badge of pride. My thick passport full of different stamps from all over the world. And she said, what if we created a passport for, call it an Uber elite? We had the opportunity to create what we call the Steep Society. And I said, yeah, let's try it. And so she designed this. We have an incredible designer. She designs everything. And it just says, welcome to Steep Society. Within these pages begins a quiet ritual. Steep Society is for those who appreciate the craft of tea, the meeting of leaf, water, and intention that gives meaning to every cup. Every visit to Chagee adds to that experience. This passport is your guide. What comes next is yours to discover. And what we did is we introduced how it works. The journey begins. Unlock what awaits. To your point, it's all about education. But what a beautiful way to invite, not to dryly educate. And then what you see, if you follow our social media for USA Chagee, we invited people to collect 4 stamps. Each stamp was designed for each of our new tea house openings, our NTOs. And when you collect all 4, you enter the Steep Society. And I can't show you this other thing, but this is the special surprise that we give them when they enter the society.
As the member.
I have to tell you, we didn't know what was going to happen with this because if you go to all the NTOs, the new tea house openings, it is days of investment. It's travel all over the coast. It's waiting in line. People wait up as early as 4 a.m. to queue up to get some of the things that we have to offer in terms of the goodies. And we created this little tea journey. Look how cute this is. So we said, look, if you go to each of our tea houses, you will get a different colored plushie, collect them all. So you get something great. You also get your stamp. And these guys are incredible. They trusted us. They didn't even know what this really meant, but they said, this is beautiful. This is so cool. I want to experience it. So we're tapping into that curiosity versus saying, I have some very fabulous tea. Let me tell you about it and what you don't understand. Instead, it's a warm, thoughtful, intentional invitation. And we didn't know how many people were going to sign up. I'll tell you, people who entered the Steep Society, we have over 300 just in the last month and a half. Wow. And that kind of commitment, we do not take for granted.
And I think what you are right now showcasing also, at least in our part of the world, in North Asia here, be it Japan, be it Korea, being again Greater China, it is very popular. Think about different communities. I mean, from Pop Mart, right, to again, there's a ton of F&B brands, there's a ton of cosmetic brands, apparel brands, etc., that actually co-create with their consumer, that actually have those occasions to play a game, to join a very unique group of consumer that becomes a co-creator who then can contribute their R&D ideas that can help review marketing materials, etc. So it's really a very different relationship rather than, let's just transact. Let's just get to know each other. So you're bringing that mindset to the market, and consumers are embracing it. So that's what I hear.
They love it. They love it.
They
and
love
we've started to engage. I mean, I like to work the lines. My team engages and kind of gets to meet people. We go out at 7 a.m. and say, thank you so much for coming. We're not going to open for some time. Are you warm? Did you bring a jacket? And we just get to know them and hear their stories. I met this amazing gentleman. He had a folding chair at Long Beach, and he was probably person number 75 in line. He'd been there since 6 a.m., something like that. It just really incredible. He had his folding chair. He had his laptop. He had something hanging off the side. He was ready to go. And I said, I'm just curious. Can you tell me who you are? He said, my name is George. And if I remember, he's a designer. And he said, I'm actually here for my son. And he held up his bag. He said, I've got 3 of the plushies. I promised my son I would come here and line up and get the 4th. And my son has been raving about the tea. So this is my excuse. But he said, I have literally set up a workstation. I've been sitting here working happily all morning. And, you know, this older gentleman who is Caucasian, lives in the neighborhood, has never heard of Chagee, couldn't say our brand. And he asked me, what does Chagee mean? I said, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you asked. Cha is tea, and G is an invitation, or it means to share or extend. And so Chagee at its heart is an invitation to everybody who walks in our doors. And he said, even me. And I said, yes, George, even you. It's such a delight. And I don't know, Ashley, we've known each other a long time. I don't know if you noticed on my LinkedIn, I changed it recently to, instead of whatever my title was, I changed it to Joyful Leader. And the reason is, I was reflecting on how our titles are all rented. The company is probably not my lifelong company, but this description ought to define who I am. And what I hope I can bring to any company or to any endeavor is joy. And, you know, something like this passport, or something like the engagement in the lines, or even bringing my team here to work in my home. If you can bring joy into the workplace, you marry that with a person's natural curiosity to learn more about your brand. That is true marketing in the contemporary age.
This is absolutely beautiful. And it's a gorgeous connection into our next question about the leadership. Because you have, as you said, all of our titles are rented. And you've worked from Apple to Starbucks to P&G to right now, Chagee. It's an extraordinary range of industries and cultures. And what is, in your experience, the most counterproductive leadership lesson you've learned so far? Something that contradicts maybe something that a business school teaches, but that you find true, apart from the fact that you need to be a joyful leader and have fun and open your own living room to host your team and really bring that community to life.
You know what came to mind is an image. I think we are often taught about the learning curve, right? It goes from lower left to upper right. The idea that you will slowly start to earn your way up this learning curve, you will start to master skills, you will amass these new experiences, they're going to make you better, and you'll become wiser, and then somehow you will be at the peak. I think that is counterintuitive today. There is no peak. I think when we learn, perhaps we don't even learn up. Perhaps we learn sideways. Perhaps we join different industries. Perhaps what we're doing right this very minute is disrupted by AI, and then we have to relearn it in a completely new way. I think that idea of starting to grow, ascend, and crest is not real. I've now worked since 99, so 27 years. I've worked in a couple of industries. I grew very quickly in my career, and then I purposely took the step back to support Jay as the CCO. Wherever I've been, sometimes it's gone left, sometimes it's hiked up pretty quickly, pretty high, and now I've chosen to come back to this role. It's no longer about a linear path. And I think we unshackle ourselves when we no longer force ourselves into that paradigm. Look, you are who you want to be. What is your desired thing to learn? What is your desired end state? How do you want to leave this world? It's probably not with a title. That's not going to matter at the end. What was that book that the nurse wrote, The 5 Regrets Before Dying? You know the things that are going to matter to you. Are you invested in those things? And how do you structure your life in the micro and the macro moments to enable you to deliver that desired end goal? It's probably no longer a linear line.
It is no longer, and it's being disrupted every single day. They say that a young executive, so Gen Alpha, who is going to enter workforce in a couple of years, going to have about 18 to 24 careers in their lifetime. Think about that. 18 careers. It means
Yeah.
they could be a creative writer, they could be a barrister, they could be 18. Typically, we pick a career, right? And we remain a marketer, for example, for 20 years or more. And now things are completely different. And as you said, it's very interesting that you don't need to climb that same ladder. You don't need to, that line doesn't need to be a line anymore.
Right.
Decide how you want to live, who you want to be, and based on that, choose occupation to support your vision for the next few years. That is beautiful. And when it comes to work culture, so American companies, I imagine, work very differently and operate differently. And to be a senior leader in a firm like this also requires a unique set of skills and approaches versus a Chinese company. So do you see a lot of differences, and what are they? For example, you earlier said that Jay had this vision for 100 years. In my experience, a lot of Chinese companies, be it AI startups or be it Alibaba or be it Chagee, they all have a very long-term vision. Typically, they think in decades or, again, 100 years terms. And for a lot of maybe American companies, that might or might not be the case, right? So in your experience building those global brands, but coming from a very distinct, let's say, American and Chinese culture, are there a lot of differences? Or today, it does not matter. Everybody is very equal.
I do think there are still differences. It goes back to perhaps the root and the wings. Our roots are different between China and the US. And certainly for every other country, but I can speak to that with my own personal experience. I think Dan Brown wrote a beautiful book. And the core premise is that America is led by lawyers and China is led by engineers. So America may be very good at building scaffolding and China knows how to leverage it very quickly. I think that mindset does make sense. The other thing that my uncle wrote in one of his earlier books, AI Superpowers, is this always landed with me. He said, culturally in China, when you see something that works, you think, game on. I am going to immediately copy that. I see this small stall on the street that is selling the hell out of toilet lids. I am going to put a stall right next to them that sells toilet lids, and I'm going to go get a piece of that business. And there's no shame in it because the idea of copying and iterating and optimizing means everybody wins, the pie grows, and we all get rich. In the States, I remember he used an example in the book where he said Groupon. I think that might have been the example. Somebody came up with this brilliant idea for group coupons. And do you know how the reaction was? It was not game on. The reaction was, great job. Wow, you came up with a good idea. Congratulations. And those are two very fundamentally different reactions to success. One is game on, everybody in, and it becomes a race. And you know what? When we're all racing and scrabbling and trying to iterate and optimize, wow, how quickly we develop. Versus that mindset of, wow, we will recognize the winner. That is something really good, but I don't want to copy it. I don't want to do exactly that. I will go do something else. So I do think those couple examples demonstrate a little bit differently the base from which we come. However, that said, you see a lot of agility in the US now, perhaps much more than, when I started at Procter & Gamble, for instance. And then you see a lot more thoughtfulness and strategizing for the long term in China, to your point.
Yeah, very interesting. I absolutely agree with what you were saying about innovation because we work a lot in China innovation space and we keep hearing that again and again that, but Chinese copied here, Chinese copied there. And to be very honest, that concept of apprenticeship is a 1,000-year-old concept. It's not just China. Apprenticeship was very common around the world, including places like Germany, where to become a baker, you had to first work for another baker for a decade to then get a title that you are a baker, not just assistant baker. And apprenticeship in Chinese culture meant you follow the master, and then what is your only job? Is to do exactly as the master does. He makes one stroke, you make one stroke. He does it this way, you do it this way. So only after a certain period of time when you can copy master's level of output to perfection, then you graduate. And then on top of it, what do? You add your own style. Then you become a master yourself and you develop your style. So that is why when, as you said, Chinese see a great idea, like, fantastic. Let me copy that. And just like with WeChat, let me add other things and make it my own. And I think there's just misunderstanding of what innovation is. In the West, we very often think about it needs to be unique and very, very different. But does this, in your experience, lead to any conflict? Like, let's say, a brand that is primarily coming from the Chinese roots, and maybe there are some Chinese creators or executives that now need to work in a very different culture and educate a consumer, which comes with a slightly different mindset. Are there more conflicts or are there more exciting exchanges?
I think actually they are one and the same. Because, we grow through friction, right? There's this wonderful phrase that iron sharpens iron. So my daughter always calls me an axe murderer because she comes to the kitchen and finds me sharpening my knives. And she's like, Mom, that is so creepy. But I do. I like my knives sharp. And the only way you can sharpen your knife is by rubbing it against something else that's sharp. And sometimes even the sparks fly. But when you find those moments of friction, when you're sharpening, those are the moments that you unlock new learns. So I think they are exactly one and the same. When you have cultures collide, and they don't always have to be China and the US, they could be somebody coming from a big company and somebody coming from a startup working on the same team. It could be somebody who has worked 5 years and somebody who has worked 20 years, coming with different perspectives. Somebody comes from coffee, somebody comes from tea. Everybody comes from their own unique background and set of assumptions and a filter through which they see the world and circumstances. Now, the question is, do they know that they have a filter and that every single person has a filter? Because when you have that moment of friction and the sparks are flying, if you can be intentional and reflect and say, hey, hold on a second, what am I seeing and what are you seeing? Sometimes you find people are using the same word and they're getting frustrated because they're like, well, I was saying the same thing. Well, why aren't you doing it? And it can very easily go to telling a story about it. Maybe Ashley's not respecting me. Maybe she says one thing and does another. But in fact, maybe Ashley sees it one way and I see it another way, and we're using the same word, but it has a different meaning to each of us. So when we can take a moment and redefine, try to calibrate our vocabulary, what we normally find is, yes, we're coming from different places. And that's exactly where the growth is unlocked.
It is exactly the way to look at anything in life, as you said, because conflict, misunderstanding, and negative emotion do not need to come hand in hand. Conflict can be fuel for growth. And negative emotion, we need to ask ourselves, why am I feeling this way? What does it actually mean for me? And everybody has a different version, a little bit of reality. So as long as we know what is our big outcome, I think we can always come together. And boy, does the world need us all coming together and bringing that mindset into the workplace and also into, let's say, global stage right now in particular. You've earlier mentioned technology, you've earlier mentioned AI, and also how Jay and the company are using AI to create a new type of tea and products. So let's talk about that. The whole world is changing, obviously. AI, robotics, extended reality, everything is being disrupted. One place that might not be too disrupted is the third place. We'll still need to come together. We still want to live in a physical world. We might have a bit more robots making us drinks than humans, but we would want to be, if it's a place to come together and it's a communal setup, we would want to have people, right? So how is your industry changing? How are you within Chagee? How are you using technology to not be left behind and probably even to innovate for the whole industry?
Well, I again credit Jay with developing this cutting edge equipment that is so cool, and it gives us so many things to talk about. I think our responsibility, in fact, we were talking about this just today as we were touring, is we can do a better job of telling those stories. You can see the back of the equipment when you walk into our tea house, but do you know what's happening? Do you know that we actually blend whole loose leaf tea every morning into a fine powder? Do you know that we are extracting a pure tea shot? That is so cool. Even if you don't exactly know what it means, all of those words sound super interesting. I want to hear more. But it's also not reasonable to expect charistas who are just coming into these roles and learning how to do their job behind the bar to also tell those stories. And so we're challenging ourselves, because I also look after tea house design. How do we embed that storytelling, that experience into every element of the tea house design itself? I think those are things that we can constantly think about to tell our story, to invite people in and help them discover what they want, when they want, and with whom they want. That's the power of technology. You know, there's a lot that we had done back in the day when we opened on Nanjinglu, the first Starbucks roastery. And I remember the challenge when I was hired, Belinda said, I need your help. This is one of the big projects because we have the building, but we haven't designed yet the customer experience. And if I recall, it was opening in about 4 or 5 months. So how are you going to help people experience this massive space with 2 stories, 5 bars? And by the way, it's a roasting plant, so it's really loud. That's where the power of technology really comes to play. And that's where my passion has been since you and I first met, which is the OMO, the online meets offline integrated customer experience. You know, when we talk about the app that we just redesigned, I started June 1st, and then I was sort of taking some time to observe and learn, to visit Asia. So I really started activating in September. By November, we had a new loyalty program out there. We got to move at the speed of China. And what's been amazing to see is our app's rating went up significantly in the App Store. The ability to engage, to deepen relationships with guests and potential guests who are interested to learn more about Chagee has exponentially increased. That's the power of technology. And we haven't even scratched the surface on that.
Talking about the app, there's so many apps on our devices.
Yes.
Question is, why would, and this is again a question to customer experience, and what value do you add to the customer? Why would somebody download an app for a tea brand that they're visiting, right? I mean, it's not easy to convince someone. And in China, it's clear why, because we all use mini programs. I mean, I have WeChat on my phone, and then, I mean, it's easy, right? I go into Bosideng, right, the Chinese sportswear outfit, and I buy myself a t-shirt, and I'm on their sort of kind of app because we transact through a mini program and I get discounts. So the reason for me to be in their pool is very strong, number one. Number two, I don't need any more apps. I don't need more complexity in my life. So that's why in China it works so well. But I would assume in the US, again, people are overwhelmed with the apps. So how do you convince people? And what kind of disproportional value do you offer within that app so people would still vote with their downloads?
That's right. You just said that so well. And in fact, that's the key. People don't need more complexity. So how do you create simplicity? And, you know, isn't that what tea does overall? It creates a calm in the chaos. I remember something that we just tried. My head of creative came up with this idea. We were launching the Stars Align concept back in November, December, as we were launching new creative. We were landing with our 3rd tea house in North America. We were celebrating our 8th year anniversary. All the stars were aligning. And he said, you know, this is coming right up on Thanksgiving. There's Black Friday. It's the busiest shopping day of the year. And at Century City, at some of these malls that are indoor, outdoor, and just so beautiful and great experiences, they are still super busy. And he said, you know, wouldn't it be nice instead of Black Friday, we talked about the blue hour? It's that gorgeous hour of dusk, my favorite time of day, when the sun hasn't completely set yet, but there's that moment of stillness, of pause. And he created this gorgeous image, and then we put it on the mall, all the mall digital ads, and we said, blue hour, on the busiest shopping day of the year, come enjoy a moment of stillness. You don't know about tea extraction. You don't know about my AI equipment. What you just saw, though, is a brand promise. It's an invitation to something that is warm and personal. Then I think, you're giving me simplicity. You're giving me something I want. Maybe you're even giving me something I didn't even know I needed in that moment. That is simplicity. That is a deep, insightful understanding of our guest and our potential guest. And then it's inviting them into something that adds value to their life. And that is a proxy for our loyalty program. That's exactly what we wanted to design. And, you know, it's loyalty, spelled TEA, of course, but it's also so much more than that. This isn't about loyalty. This is entirely about relationship. Let's go back to Jay's words, 以茶会友. How do we bring people and communities together over tea? You know, when you look at the Steep Society, this is a great example of how we bring people together over tea in joy, excitement, curiosity. And the best part is, very, very few people, other than George, are lining up individually. I could show you so many photos and videos, and actually you can see it on our social carousels. It's all groups. This has become fun. If you wait since 4 a.m. and you're cold, you're normally not in the best mood. You know, I helped open a lot of Apple stores in Asia. And what we find is, I've not found a single grumpy person, truly, Ashley, and I'm there early morning. They're saying, thank you for making these experiences for us. And there's this woman, Marie, she's awesome. She's one of our super fans. She's always, we've got her in our social media looking absolutely fabulous in some of the shelves. And she's like, you guys have created so many fun experiences. Thank you. Do you know what you're doing? You're bringing joy to Los Angeles. And that's exactly what we need. And she said that not knowing my LinkedIn profile. She said it because that's what we're doing. That's what a great loyalty program does. It's not loyalty. It brings joy to people. It meets them where they're at, delights them in ways they couldn't even articulate to you. And then it deepens a relationship with them.
And will there be any robots in stores?
No.
No,
Not
humans.
in the
Humans
foreseeable
first.
future. I did see one of our competitors recently created a social media post that went kind of big because they had a robot serving the tea. And I remember back in the day when I was at Starbucks, what was that called? That brand? Is it Robot X or Cafe X? It was a little kiosk at IAPM, and it was a robot, And then let me rewind even further at IHG. I worked at Intercontinental Hotels Group, and we had a lot of different hotel brands within our portfolio. And G Hotel and Jinjiang started to come out and create these sort of humanless experiences where you can just use your phone, check in, use your phone, it becomes a key card. All of those are parallels. They're parallels for a tech disruption of an existing industry. And I think they're great because they will meet a certain consumer where they're at. A lot of people want to travel and never talk to a human. I don't want you to say hi, Miss Chang. I don't want you to tell me what I like to drink or eat. I just want to get to my room. But
I want to get my keys.
Yeah. But that also is a different consumer. If you're coming to the Intercontinental Hotel or Hualax Huayi Zhoutian, which is one of the brands that my team designed, you want to be treated like a VIP. You want to be seen, you want to feel recognized, and that's just a different group, and that is a different service that we curate just for you. So in the same way, I think every brand has the opportunity to consider, who am I seeking to serve? What is their desired feeling? What is the feeling I give them? Because people will forget what you give them. Did you give me 10% off or 15% off? I don't remember, but I know how you made me feel when you gave me that blue hour offer. And I walked into Chagee, and even though it was bustling, there was a moment of stillness. And I tried something new that I'd never tried before. I didn't know what an amber oolong tea latte was. And I loved it. And then I went back out into my shopping journey refreshed. Those are the moments that we can bring to people if we're being intentional and we curate with thought and a very high level of design integrity.
And all of that sounds absolutely wonderful. As you say, there are people queuing up. People are excited to try tea. There is this newly re-envisioned third space, and you're expanding to international markets. But when we look at the, let's say, stock prices, right? The markets, as of not the consumers, but the markets, the financial markets, they have a very different opinion or fears or whatever it might have been. Because the stock dropped, I think, about 65% since listing, and it's not really moving. So yes, maybe somebody's panicked. Maybe there's been, let's say, geopolitical tensions or other fears. Maybe the intense price wars in China have impacted all that. But it's also been some time already. Why, in your experience or in your understanding, the markets are not putting their vote for this industry or for Chagee as a firm yet?
Well, I guess I would go back to the role strategically of each region, right? And understanding first the Chinese brand, second, understanding the role that each region plays. Think about Jay and what he's doing right now. He's got 7,000 tea houses in a very saturated market in China. He's growing and investing in growing new markets in Asia Pacific. And he's investing in us and our team and establishing a global brand in North America. That's a whole lot of investment. And I think from a life cycle standpoint, there are different things happening in different parts of the world. And I guess I'll speak for myself. When I look at it from a US point of view, I think that's actually very exciting. We're meeting the needs of our customers and establishing Chagee as a modern tea house in the US. We only just opened our 8th tea house. So I'm just a very, very small cog right now in a bigger wheel. And I guess what I would say is I don't have the full picture, so I wouldn't want to speak out of turn. We do have a very dedicated team of people ensuring that we're meeting the needs of our shareholders. Where I am, I feel like is a bit of a luxury. I get to establish the global brand. I'm clear in the remit and what he's asked us to do, and I think we're doing it. We just collected, actually, our first set of true, robust data from a brand equity standpoint, from a market share standpoint, and from a who is our target audience standpoint. And I would say we are exceeding. And you know, the last data set is our internal data on loyalty, digital, you know, monthly, daily active users, repeat, mobile order, percent of revenue, all of these data sets. For such a small brand, we have really robust data, and we are exceeding our targets on every single one of those measures. So I think we're off to a good start. We're still small and we're still growing though.
And then let's move ahead to 2030. Where is Chagee in 5-6 years from now? And more broadly, what do you think of the rising Chinese brands or international brands with Chinese roots? Are there more of them on the global stage? What industries do they come from? How is the East and West in about 5 years from now actually coming together and interacting with each other?
Well, my personal desire is that there are more brands crossing the ocean, because when you step back and think about the roles that different industries play, private business plays an important role. Jay is so inspiring to me on so many levels. He wants to take a stand on a global platform that says, I want to bridge. I want to be intentional and bring the best of Yunnan to the world. When you talk to him, he is so positive. He's so passionate. He wants to leave a social legacy. And that's really what drew me here. You know, you look at, well, you know, having written a book, I guess I'll start there. And having led creative agencies for 5 or 6 years, when you start at a Procter & Gamble, you maybe don't think about creativity and the importance of voices speaking out in the world. As I've gotten older and as I got to lead hundreds, thousands of creatives, and I got to live my own experience writing a book, I have come to deeply respect those voices. You've got media, which is motivated in many ways to create divisiveness. You've got governments who are speaking with different objectives and intents. Who's going to speak with objectivity, with the desire for bridging, with the desire for fostering mutual understanding and I was wanting to say peiyang. How do you say that? Nurture in English. And nurturing that curiosity. If you see curiosity, instead of squashing it and creating an algorithm that further differentiates a person from another person, that starts feeding them information that then feeds their own biases and takes them down this road where they're not understanding both sides, where they have to work so hard to understand both sides. People like Jay, companies like these Chinese companies going abroad, like the companies trying to enter new countries anywhere in the world, I applaud them and I'm grateful for them, because that is what's going to help the world better understand how big it is and how small we are within it, and what a great opportunity we have to learn something new.
And the last question, how do we all become such a voice at any level? Be it somebody who is just at the beginning of their career, coming out of school, or somebody who is in a corporate setting, as high or as low as we want to go, and somebody who has their own business, or maybe somebody who works, as you said, in organizations or governments. What advice would you have to them, or what hope would you share with them on how can we all be that voice and bring the world a bit closer together? Given that today, in 2026, with the technological advancements and all, we either succeed all together as humanity, not as Americans and Chinese and Africans and whatnot, but as humanity. Or we fail together as humanity. So how do we become those voices?
I think we start with the end in mind. That's my easy answer. How do you want to be remembered when you're gone? Just like when you change roles and people bring out a sheet cake and they serve punch and they say, oh, Ashley was so good in this role. Here's what she did for the business. That is sort of your mini business epitaph. Right? That's what people say about you as you move on, as they close the chapter and you move into something new. How are you going to close the chapter of your life? What are they going to say about you? If you can define that, write it down, there's such power to words, then you're going to be living into that vision. You are going to be making choices. It starts distilling very easily. Do I go to this or do I do that? Do I spend my time here or do I invest in that? So if you start with the end in mind, write your own epitaph. How do you want to be remembered when you're gone? It comes back to your social legacy. I wrote mine years ago. It's something about she gave outrageously. She lived every day joyfully with strength and dignity. And now if I have one more tattoo, it would be that she died empty. And that might sound a little depressing, but what I mean by that is I have this image. It's like a little balloon. You know, when you buy a balloon for the first time, it's quite empty, but it's flat. And then you blow on it or you fill it with water. I imagine life is like this balloon, and you fill it with like different liquids and confetti, and this balloon becomes really big, filled with all of your lived experiences. And you get to a point, because I'm turning 50 this year, and you think, you know what, all that beautiful stuff in the balloon, let's let it start coming out and let it rain beautifully over the people around us. And that balloon will start to shrink as you share all those lived experiences with the people around you. And eventually what happens at the end, the balloon starts a certain size, it ends the same size, but now it's like kind of all wrinkled, and it's lived this gorgeous life, and it's soft. That's what it means to me to die empty. So that helps me be intentional. You know, tiny story, I do these TikToks. It's spareroom.emilychang. And I have like 400 followers. This is tiny. I don't boost it.
Well, you're going to have 401 with me joining you tomorrow.
Thank you. But I do it. It's almost like a labor of love. I was telling my daughter, because it's part of dying empty. If I have wisdom and I can share it, what's cool about TikTok is the people who follow you don't know you. They have found you on the For You page. And if I get to talk to 400 people about something that makes their lives better, I want to keep doing it. That's part of my social legacy. So it helps you be intentional with the ways you want to contribute to the people you know and that you don't know. And at the end of your life, when you look back, can you say that was a life well lived? That was a life that I knew how I defined, and then in fact, I made choices every single day to live it to the very fullest. The Balinese have a saying that says 100 years, all new people. And I just find that incredibly simplifying. Wherever you are in your life, you're 20, you're 50 like me, you're 80, you have a limited amount of time left. What are you going to do with it? And have you defined that end state so that when you look back, you're like, yeah, that was a good life.
Yeah, if all of us had that clarity early on and we all wanted to build a better, more connected world, wouldn't life be so much better? And I think your story and your commitment to helping others and also live life so intentionally, it shines through in every interaction that we've had, in every interview that you've recorded, through your book, through your, I'm sure, TikTok. This is something I'm going to check right now. So I think that Jay and Chagee is a very lucky company to have you represent them on the global stage. And it's inspiring to see that your and their global promise and intent and direction are actually aligned. I'm even more excited about this firm right now because you represent it. For our listeners out there, how can they follow you? Where do you want to direct them if they would like to continue this conversation with you, continue this journey, and maybe also how can they continue following Chagee's development globally and bringing tea?
Yeah. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Emily Chang, Chagee CCO. That's easy. You can find me personally on socials at spareroom.emilychang. The website is social-legacy.com. And we do have different Chagee apps, and we have different social handles. So look for the Chagee USA to see what we're doing here in North America. And of course, we have our mini program in China.
Absolutely. And if you have not experienced the Chagee yet, I do recommend you checking them out. And if there's any new exciting developments, I'm sure when it comes to the third space reinvention, Chagee is going to be a part of that story. Thank you, Emily, for today. We are looking forward to 2030 vision and more voices joining together, building this new global story. Thank you so much for being this voice for all of us.
Thank you, Ashley.